Hey everyone, today it's finally time for a video that I promised quite some time ago. The reason why I held off this long is twofold. First of all, the friends that I raid with in Lost Ark weren't all ready to do the hard mode version of Valtan just yet. So because we like to stick together for the raids, we've been doing normal mode for the first few weeks, and I didn't want to make this video before I experienced and cleared hard mode. Second reason is that I want to get a few clears under my belt. When something is new, it's always very exciting, and I wanted to give it some time to become part of the week-to-week gameplay. So now that both of those things have happened, here's the video. In this one, I'll go over the different aspects of the raid, kind of like how I experienced it myself as a player. I'll be comparing it a little bit with Final Fantasy XIV raids as well, because that's where I'm most familiar with raiding. The different difficulties that are available, the rewards that you will get from those difficulties, and then also how the raids are built, and kind of going into the mechanics behind the encounters. Not what mechanics the boss will do, but going into the encounter design, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So let's begin with the difficulty options, because that's a fairly short one. There's normal mode and hard mode, and in the upcoming patch we're also getting Inferno, which is the same thing as hell mode as it's known in the other regions of the game. Normal and hard are the ones that you'll be doing for progression, and Inferno is purely there as a challenge with Vanity Rewards. You could compare this to Ultimate in Final Fantasy XIV. Instead of getting a shiny weapon and a title, you will get a statue for your stronghold and a title. And there are also special rewards for completing multiple different Inferno difficulty raids, but those will take some time to come to the West. I personally don't have any experience with Inferno, because it's just not out yet for us, and I also don't see myself clearing one anytime soon. Not because I don't want to try and clear one, I'm actually quite curious to give it a shot myself, but the investment that progressing one requires is something that I just cannot afford right now. While skill points, engravings, tripods and gems are provided to you for free for an even playing field, consumables are not, and those will become quite costly in the long run. So because I'm still investing my gold into progressing my characters right now, Inferno seems to be something that I would attempt after I've gotten to a point in the game where I don't feel the need to progress as much anymore. But we'll see. If they decide to make consumables free in there, then I would 100% give it a try, because I enjoy raiding Ultimate in Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm sure it would be no different in Lost Ark. As for normal mode and hard mode, as I mentioned before, these are the ones that you will be doing to progress your character's gear. Both difficulties will grant you relic accessories and relic ability stones, but the armor materials are slightly different. Normal mode will drop both legendary and relic materials, whereas hard mode only drops relic materials. So if you're doing hard mode, you can craft your relic armor twice as fast, because you just get more materials. But if you aren't able to do hard mode yet, because the lack of item level or if the raid is just too hard for you, then you can still clear normal mode and save up materials from there to eventually craft your gear. It'll just take a little bit longer, but I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. As for the differences, it's definitely not as big of a gap in difficulty as, let's say, normal and savage in Final Fantasy. Hard mode was definitely a step up from normal, but the majority of the mechanics in the fight were the same or very similar. So if you've practiced the fight a few times on normal mode, when then making the switch to hard mode, you're already set up with a lot of knowledge about the mechanics and normal attack patterns of the boss. There will still be some new stuff that gets layered onto mechanics that you've already seen, but it's not like you'll be fighting a completely different encounter, like it can sometimes feel in Final Fantasy. I do know that the next Legion raid, Vicus, apparently has a bigger jump in difficulty between normal mode and hard, but I can't comment on that personally, as we just haven't got that raid yet in the West. So I'll find out about that in a few weeks. So those are the differences between normal and hard. Hard mode is definitely a step up in difficulty, and you will get more relic materials as a reward for doing that harder fight. But it is possible to progress your character without ever needing to step into hard mode. It'll just take some more time. As for the encounter design, up to this point, fights in Lost Ark have felt more like Monster Hunter fights than actual raid encounters. There are a few encounters that have actual mechanics mixed in here or there, but for the most part you will be dealing with normal attack patterns. While the normal attack patterns certainly aren't gone, things are a whole lot more scripted, and it's a combination of these two types of attacks that I actually really enjoy. In Final Fantasy, everything from start to finish is scripted, so it can make fights stale after you've done them a few times. So you already know everything that's going to happen. here, the mixing of normal patterns keeps you on your toes. So you're not just learning a script, you also need to learn to identify the normal patterns. And you also need to learn to identify when it's a normal pattern or a special pattern that is happening. So the scripted nature of the fight makes it feel more like a raid boss that I'm used to from Final Fantasy, but the normal patterns that are mixed in make the fight feel very Lost Ark-like. And it's a unique combination that makes for a very pleasant raid experience. Legion raids also have some sort of a new mechanic introduced, which is the sidereal gauge. This is what you can see on the top left of the screen. It will slowly fill over time, and when you execute certain mechanics correctly, it will grant you a decent chunk on the gauge, and once it's full, the raid commander, as it's called, can choose which of the 3 sidereals to use. You can kind of compare it to a limit break in Final Fantasy, it's just that only one person gets to control them in here. Each of them, just like in 14, have their own effect, and in Valtan we get to use Tyrain, Wei and Baltor. Tyrain does high damage and also high weak point, Wei deals high stagger, and Baltor grants a very potent defense buff. So before you get started on the encounter, you can discuss with your group which one that you want to use where, and then it's on the raid commander to make use of the sidereals. They're all skill shots though, so it's totally possible that you miss one of them and cause a wipe, or you can also accidentally use the wrong one. Definitely led to some very funny moments within my group. The flexibility of the summons is also quite nice, because depending on your group you can choose to make certain parts of the fight easier. For example, in the first gate there are 2 stagger checks that have some added mechanic on top, which is that you have to grab orbs. If you mess up the orbs, then that is going to cause a wipe. So a popular puck strat is to have one person gather and kite all of the orbs around while you cheese the stagger check using Wei. For my group, however, we do the stagger check correctly, and then I use Tyrain afterwards to push DPS. In the second gate, we actually do it the other way around. We don't use Tyrain to push our DPS, but we use Baltor to make our lives easier. For the first mechanic, we would normally have to control our DPS, make Valtan rush into the 4 correct pillars, which then drop orbs, which we then all need to pick up. But alternatively, we can just ignore all of that and then use Baltor to survive the mechanic instead. So we can just DPS away at Valtan, we don't have to care about having to crash him into the right towers, and then also making sure that everyone grabs an orb. We just wait for him to do the mechanic, we gather for Baltor, and we're good. Later in the fight, he does one final mechanic before going into his ghost phase, which is like the final DPS phase. That's also really easy to mess up. So for that one, we also use Baltor to make sure that we all survive going into the final phase, because if we're all alive going into that, then we'll be more than fine to make the DPS check. I guess that's something that I kind of forgot to mention, but if you die during a Legion raid, then you're going to be dead for the whole encounter. It's not like in Argos where you have 4 respawns. So that's why an encounter like Valtan, where dying is really easy, we prefer to use sidereals in such a way that it makes it easier to survive those mechanics. In Gate 1, there are very few things that would actually one-shot you, so that's why we use Tyrain there, because we don't really feel the need to it. But how you decide to use them is completely up to you. So look at what your options are, or where your group struggles, and then use the sidereals accordingly. Overall, Valtan has been a great experience for both myself and my group, as it's certainly more challenging than anything that has come before up to this point, and I can certainly see why this raid was the turning point for Lost Ark in Korea. It's quite some time investment before you can get there to take on Valtan, because he is quite far into the end game, but if you're enjoying Lost Ark, then it's definitely worth the wait. If I had to choose one aspect of the game that I enjoy the most, then it would be the combat of the game, and while everything leading up to Valtan has been good, nothing really gave me that raiding experience that I've come to love in Final Fantasy. Valtan did. So I'm really excited to get my hands on the next Legion raids as well, because Valtan has been such a good introduction that I just want more. I'm already in the process of getting 2 more characters geared up to 14-15, just so that I can do the fight a bit more often and get more experience on it, because it's the beauty of the raid. While there is a script that is being followed, there are still a lot of normal patterns that you need to learn, and learning to read them is something that comes with experience. You can't just spend some time looking through a POV or a guide to learn the timeline of the boss's mechanics, because while there is a general script that is being followed, there are still so many normal patterns that you'll have to learn to react to. And that also allows you to show some mastery over the fight. And then once you've mastered the fight, then you could dip your toes into the Inferno difficulty. So I'm really hoping that they kind of make consumables free in there, or maybe I should just start saving some gold, because I would love to give it a try once I feel like I've gotten a good enough mastery over the raid. But I think that pretty much sums up everything that I wanted to say. Valtan has been a great experience that is able to scratch that raiding itch, and I'm looking forward to scratching that itch some more once Vicus comes out as well. And then when she arrives, I'll be uploading our clear speedruns of that as well. Let me know if you've been able to experience Vaulten yet, and if you have, how are you finding the content? Let me know down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my patrons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.